tropical rainforests have an outsized role in the world. Of the Earth's ecosystems, rainforests support the largest variety of plants and animal species, house the majority of indigenous groups still living in isolation from the rest of humanity, and power the mightiest rivers. Rainforests lock up vast amounts of carbon, moderate local temperature, and influence rainfall and weather patterns at regional and planetary scales. Despite their importance, however, deforestation in the world's tropical forests has remained persistently high since the 1980s due to rising human demand for food, fiber, and fuel, and the failure to recognize the value of forests as healthy and productive ecosystems. Since 2002, an average of 3.2 million hectares of primary tropical forests, the most biodiverse and carbon-dense type of forest, have been destroyed per year. An even larger area of secondary forest is cleared or degraded. In recognition of World Rainforest Day 2020, which was launched in 2017 by Rainforest Partnership, below is a brief look at the state of the world's largest remaining tropical rainforests. The Amazon rainforest. The Amazon is the world's largest and best-known tropical rainforest. As measured by primary forest extent, the Amazon rainforest is more than 3 times larger than that of the Congo Basin, the world's second largest rainforest. The Amazon rainforest accounts for just over a third of tree cover across the tropics. The Amazon River, which drains an area nearly the size of the 48 contiguous United States, is the world's biggest river. It carries more than 5 times the volume of the Congo, or 12 times that of the Mississippi. By one estimate, 70% of South America's GDP is produced in areas that receive rainfall generated by the Amazon rainforest. This includes South America's agricultural breadbasket and some of its largest cities. Due to its size, the Amazon leads all tropical forest areas in terms of its annual area of forest loss. Between 2002 and 2019, more than 30 million hectares of primary forest was cleared in the region, or about half the world's total tropical primary forest loss during that period. The Amazon is thought to house more than half the world's uncontacted tribes living in voluntary isolation from the rest of humanity. However, the vast majority of indigenous peoples in the Amazon live in cities, towns, and villages. Extent: 628 million hectares of tree cover, including 526 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: about 60% of the Amazon rainforest lies within the borders of Brazil. The balance is found in parts of Peru, 13%, Colombia, 8%, Venezuela, 6%, Bolivia, 6%, Guyana, 3%, Ecuador, 2%, and Suriname, 2%, as well as French Guiana, 1%, a department of France.
Most famous species: jaguar, tapir, capybara, river dolphins, various monkeys and parrots. Bulk numbers: more than 40,000 plant species, including 16,000 tree species, 3,000 fish, 1,300 birds, 1,000 amphibians, 430 mammals, and 400 reptiles. Deforestation trend: rising in most countries, led by Brazil. The Amazon lost over 30 million hectares of primary forest, 5.5% of the 2001 extent, and 44.5 million hectares of tree cover, 6.6%, between 2002 and 2019. The Congo rainforest. The second largest block of tropical rainforest is found in the Congo Basin, which drains an area of 3.7 million square kilometers. The majority of the Congo rainforest lies within the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, which accounts for 60% of Central Africa's lowland primary forest. Gabon, Republic of the Congo, Cameroon, Central African Republic, and Equatorial Guinea account for nearly all the rest of the Congo Basin rainforest. Until the early 2010s, deforestation in the Congo Basin was relatively low. War and chronic political instability, poor infrastructure, and lack of large-scale industrial agriculture help limit forest loss in the region. Most deforestation was driven by subsistence activities, though degradation due to logging was substantial. The situation is changing, however. Deforestation has been trending sharply upward in recent years. Extent: 288 million hectares of tree cover, including 168 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, 60% of the Congo's primary forest; Gabon, 13%, Republic of the Congo, 12%, Cameroon, 10%, Central African Republic, 3%, and Equatorial Guinea, 1%. Most famous species: forest elephants, okapi, great apes including gorillas, bonobos, and chimps. Deforestation trend: deforestation is rising rapidly, though it remains lower on a percentage basis than other major forest regions. The Congo lost over 6 million hectares of primary forest, 3.5% of the 2001 extent, and 13.5 million hectares of tree cover, 4.5%, between 2002 and 2019. Australasian realm. The Australasian rainforest includes tropical forests on the island of New Guinea and northeastern Australia, as well as scattered islands that were connected when sea levels dropped during that last ice age. As a consequence of this linkage, both land masses have common assemblages of plants and animals, while conspicuously lacking groups found on islands further west. For example, cats, monkeys, and civets are absent from New Guinea and Australia, but both have an unusually high diversity of marsupials like kangaroos, wallabies, cuscus, and possums. Virtually all this region's primary tropical rainforest is on the island of New Guinea, which is roughly split between Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. New Guinea is the most linguistically diverse island on the planet, with some 800 languages. There are believed to be a few uncontacted groups in remote parts of New Guinea. Among major forest areas, Australasia had the second lowest rate of primary forest loss since 2001, but deforestation is trending upward due to logging and conversion for plantations. Extent: 89 million hectares of tree cover, including 64 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: Indonesian provinces of Papua and West Papua, 51% of the region's primary forest; Papua New Guinea, 49%, and Australia, under 1%. Most famous species: tree kangaroos, cassowaries, giant ground pigeons, saltwater crocodiles. Deforestation trend: deforestation is rising rapidly due to plantation agriculture, especially oil palm. The Indonesian part of New Guinea lost 605,000 hectares of primary forest since 2002, 1.8% of its 2001 cover, while PNG lost 732,000 hectares, 2.2%. New Guinea is seen as the last frontier for large-scale agro-industrial expansion in Indonesia. Deforestation trend. Deforestation is the highest of any major forest region, but trending downward. Between 2002 and 2019, Borneo lost 5.8 million hectares of primary forest, 15% of 2001 cover, Sumatra 3.8 million hectares, 25%, and Peninsular Malaysia 726,000 hectares, 14%. Indonesia accounted for 75% of primary forest loss in the region, compared with 25% for Malaysia. Indo-Burma. The Indo-Burma region includes a mix of tropical forest types, from mangroves to lowland rainforests to seasonal forests. Historical large-scale forest loss due to human population pressure means that surviving forests in this region are more fragmented than other regions mentioned so far. Most of the region's tree cover consists of plantations, crops, and secondary forests. The largest extent of primary forests in this region are in Myanmar, which has about 1/3 of the total area. Indo-Burma lost about 8% of its primary forests and 12% of its tree cover since 2001. Cambodia accounted for more than 1/3 of the region's primary forest loss during this period. Extent: 139 million hectares of tree cover, including 40 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: Myanmar, 34% of the region's primary forest cover, Laos, 19%, Vietnam, 15%, Thailand, 14%, Cambodia, 8%, Far Eastern India, 6%, and parts of southern China, 4%. Most famous species: elephants, 2 species of rhino, tigers, gibbons, leopards. Deforestation trend. The rate of primary forest loss was roughly flat over the past 20 years, while tree cover loss is accelerating. Cambodia accounted for 34% of primary forest loss, followed by Laos, 21%, Vietnam, 18%, and Myanmar, 16%. Cambodia lost over 28% of its 2001 primary forest cover over the period as natural forests were increasingly converted to plantations and industrial projects. Mesoamerica. Mesoamerican rainforests extend from southern Mexico to southern Panama. Costa Rica's rainforests are arguably the best known in the region thanks to its world-famous ecotourism industry, but the country ranks 5th in terms of primary forest cover. Extent: 51 million hectares of tree cover, including 16 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: Mexico, 39% of Mesoamerica's primary forest cover, Guatemala, 13%, Honduras, 11%, Panama, 11%, Nicaragua, 10%, and Costa Rica, 9%. Most famous species: jaguar, puma, tapir, peccary. Deforestation trend. The rate of primary forest loss and tree cover loss accelerated toward the end of the 2010s, driven by increasing incidents of fire, coupled with conversion of forests for cattle pasture, plantations, and smallholder agriculture. Mexico, 534,000 hectares of primary forest loss, Guatemala, 480,000, and Nicaragua, 460,000, lost the greatest area of primary forest between 2002 and 2019. Costa Rica lost less than 2% of its primary forest during the period. In contrast, Nicaragua lost nearly 30%. Wallacea. Wallacea represents a biogeographic oddity. When sea levels fell during the last ice age, islands to the west of this area joined continental Asia, while islands to the east got connected to land mass formed from Australia and New Guinea. As a result, Wallacea today has an unusual mix of species, drawing plant and animal groups from both regions, but also having high levels of endemism. Extent: 24.4 million hectares of tree cover, including 14.6 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: Indonesia. More than 60% of Wallasia's primary forest cover is on the island of Sulawesi. The Maluku Islands account for 34%. Most famous species: Babirusa, tarsiers and various monkeys, hornbills, cuscus. Deforestation trend. The rate of primary forest loss and tree cover loss jumped in 2015 and 2016 following a particularly bad fire season. Deforestation for industrial plantations, including oil palm and coconut, increased in the 2010s. Guinean forests of West Africa. The Guinean forests of West Africa consists of the lowland tropical forests that extend from Liberia and Sierra Leone to the Nigeria-Cameroon border. These forests have been greatly diminished by agriculture, including subsistence farming by smallholders and commercial cacao, timber, and oil palm plantations. Extent: 42 million hectares of tree cover, including 10.2 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: Liberia, 41% of the region's primary forest cover, Cameroon, 17%, Nigeria, 17%, Côte d'Ivoire, 10%, and Ghana, 10%. Most famous species: gorillas and chimps, pygmy hippo, various monkey species. Deforestation trend. The rate of primary forest loss has been rising since the mid-2000s. Tree cover loss sharply accelerated in the 2010s. While Côte d'Ivoire accounted for only an eighth of the region's primary forest cover in 2001, it had nearly 40% of total primary forest loss between 2002 and 2019. The country lost about a third of its total primary forests in less than 20 years. Atlantic forest. The Atlantic forest once extended from northeastern Brazil into the hinterlands of Argentina and Paraguay. Today it has been greatly reduced by agriculture and urbanization. Most of the tree cover in this region is crops, plantations, or secondary forests. Extent: 89 million hectares of tree cover, including 9.3 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: Brazil, 86% of the region's primary forest cover, Argentina, 9.5%, and Paraguay, 4%. Most famous species: jaguar, puma, golden lion tamarin, howler monkeys. Deforestation trend. The rate of primary forest loss in the Atlantic forest, known as the Mata Atlantica in Brazil, has slowed since the 20th century, with annual deforestation remaining relatively flat. Chaco Darien. The Chaco rainforest extends from southern Panama and along the Pacific coast of South America through Colombia and Ecuador. It is the world's wettest rainforest and has the lowest deforestation rate of any of the regions covered in this post. The Chaco is home to both Amerindian tribes and Afro-Indigenous or Maroon communities. Extent: 15.6 million hectares of tree cover, including 8.4 million hectares of primary forest, in 2020. Major countries: Colombia, 79% of the region's primary forest cover, Panama, 13%, and Ecuador, 8%. Most famous species: jaguar, puma, various monkeys. Deforestation trend. primary forest loss in the Chaco amounted to 1.4% of its 2001 extent between 2002 and 2019. Ecuador and Panama accounted for a disproportionately large share of this loss.
Human-led deforestation is linked to less rain in tropical rainforests, according to a new study published last month in the journal Nature. Large-scale cutting of trees in the Amazon and other rainforests could lead to declining agricultural yields, raise the risk of wildfires, and promote irregular precipitation patterns, scientists say. Robust forests help produce rainfall in a process called moisture recycling. Essentially, trees absorb rainwater and release its moisture back into the atmosphere, contributing to cloud formation and, consequently, more rain. By disrupting this process, deforestation has a far-reaching impact. The moisture can travel up to an average of 373 miles before falling as precipitation. In regions downwind of the Amazon, for example, up to 70% of rain could come from the forest-driven cloud formation, per the paper. This means that when the region is deforested, downwind areas face arid, harsher climates. When we're removing trees, we're making the environment drier, and that lack of moisture that's the big cloud above those trees just disappears. Lead author Callum Smith, a deforestation researcher at the University of Leeds in England, tells NPR's Lauren Sommer and Seema Bayram. The researchers examined precipitation and deforestation patterns in the Amazon rainforest, Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia, which hosts the Lucer ecosystem, a forested area of Indonesia. Using satellite data from 2003 to 2017, they identified significant drops in average rainfall in each of these regions. The impacts were visible even at small scales, but the most dramatic changes could be seen over wide areas. At the scale of about 15,500 square miles, scientists found that rainfall decreased 0.25 millimeters per month for every percentage point of forest loss. Importantly, the researchers demonstrate a correlation between rising human activity and decreases in local rainfall. This study reinforces the understanding that deforestation reduces rainfall, which reduces forest resilience and increases the risk of tipping points and negative impacts on local economic activities. Bernardo Flores, an ecosystem resilience researcher at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil who was not involved with the study, tells Mongabe's Sarah Brown. Experts warn the Amazon is approaching a tipping point that will result in drier conditions, turning its leafy vegetation into a savanna. This would threaten the wildlife in the Amazon rainforest, which is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, home to 1 in 10 of the planet's known species. The rainforest has been nicknamed the lungs of the planet for the way it sucks up vast amounts of carbon dioxide each year. But some dangerous changes are already occurring. The dry season in the southern Amazon is now 4 to 5 weeks longer than it was in 1970, says Carlos Nobra, an Earth system scientist who contributed to first identifying the Amazon's tipping point, to Mongabe. Once we deforest, we lose one of our greatest natural defenses in protecting ourselves from climate change. This is not only true for forests, but also other ecosystems, says Robin Averbeck, Forest Program Director at the Rainforest Action Network, to NPR. However, efforts to stop deforestation are complex. In the Congo Basin, for example, much of the forest loss is due to poor, small-scale farmers trying to survive. Francis Seymour, senior fellow at the nonprofit World Resources Institute, tells NPR it's important to distinguish corporations and governments engaging in deforestation practices from local communities who are trying to make a living. The the impact on rainfall shown in this study could be an effective argument against deforestation for governments and companies cutting down rainforests, co-author Dominic Sprakelin, an expert on biosphere-atmosphere interactions at the University of Leeds, tells The Guardian's Jonathan Watts. The idea that forests should be conserved to store carbon has greater sway in the Northern Hemisphere, while the immediate effects on hydrology are more personal to those who live near the trees. Demonstrating the local benefit of keeping tropical forests standing for the people living nearby has important policy implications, Sprakelin tells The Guardian. Brazil has worked to reduce the amount of deforestation in the Amazon since the early 2000s, wrote Jason Daly for Smithsonian Magazine in 2019. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva led efforts to decrease deforestation when he served as president of Brazil from 2003 to 2010, but former President Jair Bolsonaro oversaw an increase in deforestation after he took office in 2019. On January 1, 2023, Lula was sworn into the presidency again, after running a campaign that focused on environmental preservation and increased protections for indigenous communities. Indigenous lands contain around 80% of Earth's biodiversity. The Amazon is important for everyone in the world, says florist to NPR. When humanity faces problems in the future that we now don't even imagine now, the solutions can come from the Amazon. On the southern crest of the unscathed Amazon rainforest, a storm inundates a wooden shack just off a sodden mud road. Inside, Antonio Bertola sits clutching a $1 beer under a painting of the Virgin Mary, his face ruddy and his clothes tatty from a lifetime of work on the land. The frontier town of Realidade is a mere speck on a changing map. To the north stretch hundreds of billions of trees and more than 1 million species never charted by man. To the south, the muddy trail of human conquest reaches back for centuries. In a bittersweet tone of voice, Bertola recounts how his family of migrants had hungered for prosperity, security and, most of all, land to call their own. 5 decades ago, Brazil incentivized millions of its people to colonize the Amazon. Today their logging yards, cattle enclosures and soy farms sit on the fringes of a vanishing forest. Powered by murky sources of capital and rising demand for beef, a violent and corrupt frontier is now pushing into indigenous land, national parks and one of the most preserved parts of the jungle. Brazil's new president, Jair Bolsonaro, an unapologetic cheerleader for the exploitation of the Amazon, has the colonists' backs. He's sacked key environmental officials and slashed enforcement. His message: the Amazon is open for business. Since his inauguration in January, the rate of deforestation has soared by as much as 92%, according to satellite imaging. As human activity in the Amazon ramps up, its future has never been less clear. Scientists warn that decades of human activity and a change in climate has brought the jungle near a tipping point. The rainforest is so called because it's such a wet place, where the trees pull up water from the earth that then gathers in the atmosphere to become rain. That balance is upended by deforestation, forest fires, and global temperature rises. Experts warn that soon the water cycle will become irreversibly broken, locking in a trend of declining rainfall and longer dry seasons that began decades ago. At least half of the shrinking forest will give way to savanna. With as much as 17% of the forest lost already, scientists believe that the tipping point will be reached at 20% to 25% of deforestation even if climate change is tamed. If, as predicted, global temperatures rise by 4 degrees Celsius, much of the central, eastern and southern Amazon will certainly become barren scrubland. The fires that raged across the Amazon in August helped illuminate something the world can no longer ignore. Inside the crucible of this ancient forest, relentless colonization is combining with environmental vandalism and a warming climate to create a crisis. If things continue as they are now, the Amazon might not exist at all within a few generations, with dire consequences for all life on Earth. To understand what is truly happening to the world's largest rainforest, Time journeyed thousands of miles by road, boat, and small plane this year to the front lines of deforestation. We spoke to loggers, tribespeople, environmentalists, ranchers, and scientists. Despite growing outrage and threats by Western leaders to withhold trade with Brazil until Bolsonaro reverses course, on the ground we discover the battle for the Amazon is close to being lost. The emboldened forces of development are running without restraint, and the stakes for the planet couldn't be higher. As the official formerly responsible for Brazil's deforestation monitoring, Ricardo Galvão, who was fired in August for defending his data on tree loss, told us, if the Amazon is destroyed, it will be impossible to control global warming. The Amazon is 10 million years old. Home to 390 billion trees, the vast river basin reigns over South America and is an unrivaled nest of biodiversity. From blue morpho butterflies to emperor tamarins to pink river dolphins, biologists find a new species every other day. The first humans migrated to the Amazon from Central America about 13,000 years ago. Up to 10 million tribespeople lived in fortified settlements, creating ceremonial earthworks and cultivating fields and orchards. The Carapuna tribe roamed one enclave just south of where the Madeira River splinters into its tributaries amid rapids and waterfalls, in what today is the Brazilian state of Rondônia. The mouth of the Amazon sits 1,000 miles to the northeast. To the west and north the forest stretches into Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela. The European colonization of the Americas from 1492 saw settler plantations advance across the New World, bringing deforestation on a vast scale for farmland, firewood, and houses. By the early 20th century, the world had lost trees that would have covered the Amazon rainforest at least once over, but its rainforest remained largely intact. Not so its inhabitants. As with many of the more than 300 tribes that survive in Brazil, contact with outsiders decimated the Carapuna's numbers through illnesses such as measles and flu. When the matriarch of the clan, Katika Carapuna, was born about 70 years ago, her father led the only surviving faction of the Carapuna, which was still isolated from the wider world. Speaking with a soft lilt in her native language, she recounts that in those days, the birth of a girl caused celebration. The tribe would dance for days to the music of bamboo flutes to hail its endurance. The 20th century saw more global tree loss than the rest of history. The Amazon, with vast mineral riches under its soil, finally came under threat. In 1964, Brazil's military dictatorship took power and decreed that empty jungle was a security risk. It went on to create the National Institute of Colonization and Agrarian Reform, INCRA, to conquer the forest and make it an agricultural stronghold. In the early 1970s, the government ran television ads for a new mecca of cheap land and freedom. Bertola and his family, farm laborers descended from Italian immigrants to the south of Brazil, joined millions flooding northward on newly built highways. Everyone had the same dream, says Bertola, now 52. It just meant deforesting it all. Men like Bertola are the forward cavalry of deforestation. Where main roads are built, hundreds of makeshift logging tracks splinter off in a fishbone pattern. The land is demarcated, often illegally, and lots are typically sold for a few $100s by grileros, or land grabbers, to poor farmers, who raise the forest and build communities. Over time, electricity and phone lines arrive, and the jaguars that threaten the cattle disappear from the landscape. Once infrastructure is in place, wealthy tycoons buy up the land to build cattle ranches or vast fields of soy. Bertola and those like him track the frontier northward into the virgin forest. Once in motion, expansion is relentless. In Brazil, one of 9 countries in the Amazon basin, an area larger than Texas has been cut. Here in the frontier state of Rondônia, ranching is king, much economic activity is illegal, and state agents are bought off or out-muscled. Agribusiness in Brazil generates nearly a quarter of the country's GDP, and the Amazon alone has over 50 million cattle. For the Carapuna, the 20th century arrival of outsiders spelled further tragedy. The government sent an expedition into the forest in 1976 to find and assimilate the tribespeople, who, innocent and bare-chested, reacted joyfully at the moment of contact, dancing and holding hands with the outsiders. The delight did not last. Katika's voice drops with sadness as she explains that over the following months and years, she watched her husband, parents, and other family members die one by one after being exposed to new illnesses. The survivors tried to flee into the forest, but only 8 survived. In 1998, the few surviving Carapuna were granted a protected territory about the size of New York City. Indigenous land makes up 23% of the Brazilian Amazon and is a bulwark against deforestation. It binds the tribes to the fate of the forest. If one dies, the other likely will too. The next year, a few settlers placed a marker at a spot deep in the forest just a few miles to the west of the Carapuna's territory. Early arrivals used rifle barrels to shoot pool, and sometimes each other. They christened their town União Bandeirantes, after raiders from Brazil's past who hunted for gold and enslaved tribes. United by hardship and a sense of destiny, the newcomers held church services in the open air. Since we arrived, we understood our town to be a door God opened to bless us, says local pastor Arnaldo Bernardinho. Early in the new millennium, due to international pressure, Brazil got serious about stopping deforestation. That was felt keenly in União Bandeirantes. The authorities tried to evict the settlers and, when that failed, raids by the federal environmental regulator, IBAMA, along with the army, fined nearly every farmer in the settlement. One rancher, Edgar Goncalves de Oliveira, says he was fined $40,000 but has no regrets. I'm sure if you were in my shoes, you would have done the same, the 50-year-old told the Obama agent who fined him. On the other hand, if I were in yours, I'd also be here doing your job. Even though the government rarely succeeds in collecting the fees, a fine can prevent the recipient from getting loans and provoke aggravation. Such moves worked. Deforestation fell 83.5% from 2004 to 2012. Yet the numbers crept upward once again as protections were relaxed. As the country fell into its worst ever recession in 2014, and amid a huge government corruption scandal, Brazilians became antagonistic to the established order. The ground was fertile for Bolsonaro, then a congressman known mainly as a reactionary agitator who glorified the dictatorship. He ran for president as an outsider in 2018, his stated ambition to turn the Amazon into Brazil's economic soul, giving free rein to agribusiness giants, mining corporations, and developers big and small. Human-led deforestation is linked to less rain in tropical rainforests, according to a new study published last month in the journal Nature. Large-scale cutting of trees in the Amazon and other rainforests could lead to declining agricultural yields, raise the risk of wildfires, and promote irregular precipitation patterns, scientists say. Robust forests help produce rainfall in a process called moisture recycling. Essentially, trees absorb rainwater and release its moisture back into the atmosphere, contributing to cloud formation and, consequently, more rain. By disrupting this process, deforestation has a far-reaching impact. The moisture can travel up to an average of 373 miles before falling as precipitation in regions downwind of the Amazon. For example, up to 70% of rain could come from the forest-driven cloud formation, per the paper. This means that when the region is deforested, downwind areas face arid, harsher climates. When we're removing trees, we're making the environment drier, and that lack of moisture that's the big cloud above those trees just disappears. Lead author Callum Smith, a deforestation researcher at the University of Leeds in England, tells NPR's Lauren Sommer and Sam Abiran. The researchers examined precipitation and deforestation patterns in the Amazon rainforest, Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia, which hosts the Lucer ecosystem, a forested area of Indonesia. Using satellite data from 2003 to 2017, they identified significant drops in average rainfall in each of these regions. The impacts were visible even at small scales, but the most dramatic changes could be seen over wide areas. At the scale of about 15,500 square miles, scientists found that rainfall decreased 0.25 millimeters per month for every percentage point of forest loss. Importantly, the researchers demonstrate a correlation between rising human activity and decreases in local rainfall. This study reinforces the understanding that deforestation reduces rainfall, which reduces forest resilience and increases the risk of tipping points and negative impacts on local economic activities. Bernardo Flores, an ecosystem resilience researcher at the Federal University of Santa Catarina in Brazil, who was not involved with the study, tells Mongabe's Sarah Brown. Experts warn the Amazon is approaching a tipping point that will result in drier conditions, turning its leafy vegetation into a savanna. This would threaten the wildlife in the Amazon rainforest, which is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, home to 1 in 10 of the planet's known species. The rainforest has been nicknamed the lungs of the planet for the way it sucks up vast amounts of carbon dioxide each year. But some dangerous changes are already occurring. The dry season in the southern Amazon is now 4 to 5 weeks longer than it was in 1970, says Carlos Nobra, an Earth system scientist who contributed to first identifying the Amazon's tipping point, to Mongabe. Once we deforest, we lose one of our greatest natural defenses in protecting ourselves from climate change. This is not only true for forests, but also other ecosystems, says Robin Averbeck, Forest Program Director at the Rainforest Action Network, to NPR. However, efforts to stop deforestation are complex. In the Congo Basin, for example, much of the forest loss is due to poor, small-scale farmers trying to survive. Francis Seymour, Senior Fellow at the nonprofit World Resources Institute, tells NPR it's important to distinguish corporations and governments engaging in deforestation practices for local communities who are trying to make a living. The impact on rainfall shown in this study could be an effective argument against deforestation for governments and companies cutting down rainforests. the trees. Demonstrating the local benefit of keeping tropical forests standing for the people living nearby has important policy implications, Spracklein tells The Guardian. Brazil has worked to reduce the amount of deforestation in the Amazon since the early 2000s, wrote Jason Daly for Smithsonian Magazine in 2019. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva led efforts to decrease deforestation when he served as president of Brazil from 2003 to 2010, but former President Jair Bolsonaro oversaw an increase in deforestation after he took office in 2019. On January 1, 2023, Lula was sworn into the presidency again, after running a campaign that focused on environmental preservation and increased protections for indigenous communities. Indigenous lands contain around 80% of Earth's biodiversity. The Amazon is important for everyone in the world, says florist to NPR. When humanity faces problems in the future that we now don't even imagine now, the solutions can come from the Amazon. On the southern crest of the unscathed Amazon rainforest, a storm inundates a wooden shack just off a sodden mud road. Inside, Antonio Bertola sits clutching a $1 beer under a painting of the Virgin Mary, his face ruddy and his clothes tatty from a lifetime of work on the land. The frontier town of Realidade is a mere speck on a changing map. To the north stretch hundreds of billions of trees and more than 1 million species never charted by man. To the south, the muddy trail of human conquest reaches back for centuries. In a bittersweet tone of voice, Bertola recounts how his family of migrants had hungered for prosperity, security and, most of all, land to call their own. 5 decades ago, Brazil incentivized millions of its people to colonize the Amazon. Today their logging yards, cattle enclosures and soy farms sit on the fringes of a vanishing forest. Powered by murky sources of capital and rising demand for beef, a violent and corrupt frontier is now pushing into indigenous land, national parks and one of the most preserved parts of the jungle. Brazil's new president, Jair Bolsonaro, an unapologetic cheerleader for the exploitation of the Amazon, has the colonists' backs. He sacked key environmental officials and slashed enforcement. His message: the Amazon is open for business. Since his inauguration in January, the rate of deforestation has soared by as much as 92%, according to satellite imaging. As human activity in the Amazon ramps up, its future has never been less clear. Scientists warn that decades of human activity and a changing climate has brought the jungle near a tipping point. The rainforest is so called because it's such a wet place, where the trees pull up water from the earth that then gathers in the atmosphere to become rain. That balance is upended by deforestation, forest fires, and global temperature rises. Experts warn that soon the water cycle will become irreversibly broken, locking in a trend of declining rainfall and longer dry seasons that began decades ago. At least half of the shrinking forest will give way to savanna. With as much as 17% of the forest lost already, scientists believe that the tipping point will be reached at 20% to 25% of deforestation, even if climate change is tamed. If, as predicted, global temperatures rise by 4 degrees Celsius, much of the central, eastern and southern Amazon will certainly become barren scrubland. At least 427 species of mammals live in the Amazon rainforest, but one now dominates in terms of raw numbers: the cow. Cattle farming accounts for up to 80% of deforested land. In 2018, Brazil exported some $6 billion worth of beef, more than any other country in history. While While stringent supply chain standards make Europe a difficult market for Amazon producers, countries in Africa and Asia, particularly China, are less discerning. The law requires small farmers to maintain 80% of the forest on their land, but the penalties do not deter livestock farming. Oliveira, the rancher in Indo-Burma, cannot legally sell his cattle owing to embargoes placed by the environmental regulator. Instead, he sells animals at a discount to a middleman, who sells them to Friggin, the biggest slaughterhouse in the state, without a problem. Slaughterhouses often turn a blind eye to the source of cattle that arrives via third parties, a state of affairs the owner of Friggin, João Goncalves, happily admits exists. Striding confidently around his vast plant as a line of cow carcasses is gutted by white-clothed employees on his production line, Goncalves talks with a lifetime of certainty about the benefits of expansion into the Amazon. His slaughterhouse will soon be the biggest in Brazil, according to the company, killing a cow every 8 seconds. His company exports nearly 40,000 tons of beef each year to Hong Kong, Egypt, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, and Denmark. Throughout the industry, accountability is scarce. The Brazilian company JBS, a global leader in beef production, has been fined millions of dollars for buying cattle from farms under embargo. American agribusinesses Bunge and Cargill are among the largest players in the export of 14.9 million tons of soy from the Amazon annually, used primarily as a livestock feed. They have also been fined millions for sourcing soy from off-limits areas. For at least some working in the Amazon, the environment is simply irrelevant. We came here to open up this region, so now let's leave it. It's not logical, is it? Asks Goncalves, the slaughterhouse owner. We came here to deforest, to clean, he adds. In the next 100 years, the Amazon will all be open. It's a matter of time, right? Yet the consequences are now becoming apparent even to some of Bolsonaro's supporters in Indo-Burma. Oliveira, the rancher, says the stream at the bottom of his land has dried up. On the eastern edge of the Amazon, shrubland has emerged. And in deforested areas in the south, temperatures rose at more than double the global average. With tens of billions of trees already gone, the region is warming fast. Droughts and floods are more common, and the dry season has grown by 6 days per decade since 1980. Trees play a crucial role in putting water back into the atmosphere, and their absence means less rainfall and higher temperatures. Carlos Nobra and Thomas Lovejoy, leading authorities on the Amazon and climate change, believe all of it, deforestation, the fires lit by ranchers that spread hundreds of meters through forest, and the impact of global temperature rises, might soon push the rainforest past its tipping point. Current projections by the UN show the Earth heading for heating of up to 5 degrees Celsius this century, far higher than the 2 degrees Celsius assumed by Nobra's research. If that happens, that forest will be lost forever. In 10 or 20 years, we will make a final diagnosis, says Nobra. If this process continues, it becomes irreversible. The forces set in play in the Amazon could have serious global consequences. The forest stores up to 120 billion metric tons of carbon, equivalent to almost 12 years of global emissions at current rates. If cleared, much of that will go into the atmosphere. That alone could push the global climate beyond safe limits. The Amazon tipping point could also lead to a cascade of other potential climate tipping points. Forest dieback is strongly interconnected with other phenomena such as the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, which would cause sea levels to rise, and the degradation of frozen soil in the Arctic known as the permafrost, which would release greenhouse gases held in the ice as well as long-dormant diseases. Scientists believe that these changes combined could result in runaway global warming that humans would find impossible to reverse. To avoid the worst-case scenario, the heart of the Amazon must be spared. Although 19.8% of the 1.5 million square mi of the Brazilian rainforest has been conquered, mostly along its south and east, swaths of the west and center remain intact. But that might soon change. From the vanquished terrain of Rondônia, a decaying highway roves north into the forest. The BR-319 bisects the Purus-Madeira Basin, one of the most preserved parts of the forest, where wildlife such as nocturnal two-toed sloths, woolly monkeys and tejo lizards live undisturbed. The military inaugurated the highway in 1973 to connect Porto Velho, the capital of Rondônia, with Manaus, the largest city in the Amazon. Yet within a few years, the 550-mile road fell into disrepair, reclaimed by grass and weeds. Jaguars and anacondas would cross the asphalt, flecked with meter-wide potholes and rusting road signs. Now the BR-319 is stirring again. On this road lies Realidade, which frontiersman Bertola has called home for the past 6 years. There, the lumberyards are opening fast and the telltale fishbone tracks already mark the jungle. Today, Realidade has 21 evangelical churches and 3 chainsaw repairmen. It is a harsh life in the midst of the forest. The newly arrived face the threats of malaria, deadly snakes, and persistent torrential rain. At times it feels like the forest is fighting back against the invasion. Everyone who comes up this road comes with a dream to find wealth, Bertola says with a sigh. Here, they only find suffering. But we do not desist. Bertola, like around 5,000 fellow travelers in recent years, moved in anticipation that the BR-319 would be repaved. But, despite much debate, nothing was done, and the road deteriorated. In July, Bolsonaro committed to repaving the highway with all certainty. But paving the road will transform the geography of deforestation by creating easy access to an area of forest bigger than Germany and Holland combined, according to Philip Fernside, a professor at the National Institute of Amazonian Research. Fernside co-authored a recent study that shows paving the road and another highway, the AM364, would lead to a 277% increase in deforestation in the region by 2050. This highway will accelerate us toward the tipping point because it cuts in half a very rich water basin and an area of high biological value, says Ricardo Mello, head of the World Wildlife Fund's Amazon program. But if the worst happens, it will be felt first by those forging livelihoods on the frontier. The decline in rainfall would parch farmland and cause widespread drought. Lower river levels would have a knock-on effect on boat transport, the fishing industry, and hydroelectric power generation. If the tipping point is reached, the Amazon's economy would be largely destroyed. But the wheels of expansion continued turning unabated. In February, near the foot of the BR-319, not far from where the asphalt turns to dust, the piercing sound of drills rings out over the forest. The metal frame of a new slaughterhouse is already taking shape next to the road. In the Carapunas Reserve, the once distant hum of chainsaws and gunshots grows louder. Katika worries every day about the future. The invaders, she says, do not understand that they are in a place that is not their own. But it is the prospects facing her grandchildren that worry her most. She cannot imagine a future for them without the forest. The tribal lands are her world, she says. As the sun glows through the branches in a clearing near her village, and spider monkeys scamper in the canopy above, her eyes remain alive with defiance. If I die, she says, I die here.
Nature. The word nature is a commonly used word. This word is used in a variety of contexts. Perhaps the most important reference is the multiple species of plants, animals, wildlife, and all that the earth contains from topography such as mountains, valleys, beaches, and seas. And forests. The beauty of nature. The nature of man is characterized by its beauty resulting mainly from the wonderful diversity of living organisms that exist in various parts of the earth, as well as the unique terrain of mountains, water, plateaus, and forests. Each of these features is distinguished by a special beauty that distinguishes it from other terrain, and this great diversity gave people wide spaces to seek calm, tranquility, and tranquility. Man by nature is a creature eager to taste beauty, and there is nothing more beautiful than nature. The manifestations of the beauty of nature. For the beauty of nature are many manifestations. Wherever a person turns his face, he will inevitably find a manifestation of these appearances. Perhaps the most striking of these is the unique diversity in the colors around us, which created a wonderful natural painting. Other manifestations include variations in sizes, shapes, even among the creatures of the same species. On the other hand, one of the greatest manifestations of nature's beauty is the beautiful smells of certain creatures, such as flowers, and certain kinds of fruits, especially citrus, which is accompanied by seasons and certain times, like the smell of the earth after the rain. The beauty of nature around us. The beauty of nature around us is one of the greatest blessings of God on us. This beauty allows us to choose places and many destinations for the sake of rest, recreation, and the best of times. The beauty of nature has always been the first inspiration for artists and creators around the world. This is evidenced by the vast number of works of art, poetry, and music that have attracted people around the world, and which revolve around the beauty and charm of nature. The beauty of nature is an important source of income for many countries of the world. Natural places are a tourist attraction that helps countries to improve their economic level, and thus emerged many of the areas that are famous for their natural beauty unspeakable. The most prominent of these areas, the Amazon River, the Dead Sea, the Jita Grotto, Mount Teple, the Puerto Princesa River, the Iguazu Falls, and others. A global competition to select the 7 natural wonders has been held, and perhaps the most notable achievement of this list is the global spotlight on some areas that have not been so popular, thus contributing to a greater number of visitors than ever before. I declare this world is so beautiful that I can hardly believe it exists. The beauty of nature can have a profound effect upon our senses, those gateways from the outer world to the inner, whether it results in disbelief in its very existence, as Emerson notes, or feelings such as awe, wonder, or amazement. But what is it about nature and the entities that make it up that cause us, oftentimes unwillingly, to feel or declare that they are beautiful? One answer that Emerson offers is that the simple perception of natural forms is a delight. When we think of beauty in nature, we might most immediately think of things that dazzle the senses, the prominence of a mountain, the expanse of the sea, the unfolding of the life of a flower. Often it is merely the perception of these things itself which gives us pleasure, and this emotional or affective response on our part seems to be crucial to our experience of beauty. So in a way there is a correlate here to the intrinsic value of nature, Emerson says. The sky, the mountain, the tree, the animal, give us a delight in and for themselves. Most often, it seems to me, we find these things to be beautiful not because of something else they might bring us, a piece of furniture, say, or a delicacy, to be consumed, but because of the way that the forms of these things immediately strike us upon observation. In fact, one might even think that this experience of beauty is one of the bases for valuing nature. Nature is valuable because it is beautiful. Emerson seems to think that beauty in the natural world is not limited to certain parts of nature to the exclusion of others. He writes that every landscape lies under the necessity of being beautiful, and that beauty breaks in everywhere. As we slowly creep out of a long winter in the Northeast, I think Emerson would find the lamentations about what we have endured to be misguided. The inhabitants of the city suppose that the country landscape is pleasant only half the year. To the attentive eye, each moment of the year has its own beauty, and in the same field it beholds, every hour, a picture which was never seen before, and which shall never be seen again. The close observer of nature sees a river in constant flux, even when the river's water is frozen and everything appears to be static and unchanging for a time. Nature can reveal its beauty in all places and at all times to the eye that knows how to look for it. We can hear Emerson wrangle with himself on this very point in the words of this journal entry. At night I went out into the dark and saw a glimmering star and heard a frog, and nature seemed to say, "Well, do not these suffice?" Here is a new scene, a new experience. Ponder it, Emerson, and not like the foolish world, hanker after thunders and multitudes and vast landscapes, the sea or Niagara. So if we're sympathetic to the idea that nature, or aspects of it, are beautiful, we might ask ourselves why we experience nature in this way. Emerson says that nature is beautiful because it is alive, moving, reproductive. In nature we observe growth and development in living things, contrasted with the static or deteriorating state of the vast majority of that which is man-made. More generally, he writes, we ascribe beauty to that which has no superfluous parts, which exactly answers its end, which stands related to all things. He cites natural structures as lacking superfluities, an observation that in general has been confirmed by the advancement of biology. Furthermore, he says that whether talking about a human artifact or a natural organism, any increase of ability to achieve its end or goal is an increase in beauty. So in Emerson we might find the resources for seeing evolution and the drive to survive as a beautiful rather than an ugly process, governed by laws that tend to increase reproductive fitness and that we can understand through observation and inquiry. And lastly, Emerson points to the relation between what we take to be an individual and the rest of nature as a quality of the beautiful. This consists in the power to suggest relation to the whole world, and so lift the object out of a pitiful individuality. In nature one doesn't come across individuals that are robustly independent from their environment, rather things are intimately interconnected with their surroundings in ways that we don't fully understand. Nothing is quite beautiful alone, nothing but is beautiful in the whole. All of these qualities of beauty seem to go beyond the mere impression of sensible forms that we started with, and what they require is what also served as the basis of truth and goodness in nature.